Okay. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the marketing process and the campaign development, which is really kind of the same thing as execution. um, so the number two problem in small business is really marketing. Number one, we've talked about is cash flow. Number two is how do you get there? And execution is the issue here. And of course, you could market in terms of marketing, not business itself, but in terms of marketing, the number one problem in that case is really there's no plan. So we've talked about all of these things you do to get ready to build a plan, and you build a plan. And then how do you actually put the final pieces together, and how do you really start executing it? And so that's kind of what we'll do here today. So we've gone through the positioning statement. You'd have, by now you would have your company goals. You'd know more about your customers. You'd have a better understanding of competition and markets. And then of course you'd have your target markets and your prospects selected. And you've seen this before. So we've now gone through all of these steps. We looked at customers, did a customer analysis. We looked at competition, did a competitive look at the market itself and individual competition. And then we looked at competencies briefly about what can you really do and do well, and what should you continue to be doing in your company, and what are your competencies. And so you can combine the customer analysis and competencies along with the competitive side and come up with a competitive value, and that's the value diamond that we looked at. And then you finally get to the marketing position, and we talked about that last time. And so once you have a statement that is what is your marketing position going to be, how does it differentiate you from other people, and you've really made those decisions, which are big decisions, you're actually ready now to get into this execution mode. And so there are two basic pieces of executing, and one is you've got to develop the content, and the second is that you have to communicate that content by building good explanations of what your services are and your products are, and what the benefits are, right down to the product level, how they compare potentially with your competitors, etc. And then now you're really ready to build that plan. So here's the campaign, which is I call a marketing campaign, is the tool that helps you actually do that. And so by definition, it's a sequence of promotional activities designed to meet niche market goals by communicating a specific message to a specific target market. So first you determine the message for each target market, and then second you do the media is determined. Now this is so different than the way the average media is bought. And what typically used to happen is that somebody would walk into somebody's store, say you owned an apparel shop, somebody would walk in and he would be one of Ed's old salesmen. And he'd say, you need to advertise in our newspaper, and we've got a special coming up, et cetera, et cetera. And so the owner would kind of go, gee, my business isn't doing very well. I got to do something. We've had 4 or 5 bad days. So you begin to talk, and, you kind of like the person who's doing it. And you go, gee, I got to do something because I don't know why my sales are not doing good. And of course, that's because he doesn't have the analysis framework in place. And so that's how the purchasing used to go, or it goes that way today. People buy the media before they even think about what they should do with it. Well, the real issue is, wait a minute, you have to have the message first. I mean, it's appalling to me. Salespeople of advertising media are actually helping the customer, your business, craft the message. That's one of the most absurd things I've ever heard of. You can't let them craft the message. They don't know a thing about your business. And so they'll throw out some ideas, and pretty soon you've got some sort of an ad, and you buy it. And you commit to a certain number of days or weeks or whatever. That's how it's gone. That's why it didn't work. You can't make it work if you don't know what you're doing it for, why you're doing it, or who you're trying to talk to. It just doesn't work. And that's why most marketing people who have this approach fail. They just don't get it right. So you've got to have a purpose for your campaign. You have to have the goals, as I mentioned, and you also need to think about, well, what are the expected results? So if you're going to buy a big newspaper campaign and you have calculated now, I mean, you got to do all the same basic stuff for every buy that you do. Okay, how many of our people read the newspaper? And you would know that already. How many, our people, I'm talking about the target market. So if I'm going to pay $1,000 for an ad, but only 20% of my marketing, of my target will even read the newspaper, that means I'm paying $5,000 for that ad to reach my customer. So in other words, it's only a fifth as effective as you're being told that it is, or it's actually 5 times more costly than you're being told that it is. So you have to devalue it in order to compare. So when we do a comparison of radio stations, happened to do one recently. Don't do this much of this anymore, but I happened to do one recently for the Denver metro area. We evaluated 8 radio stations to do a radio buy, and I asked them to give me the demographics, and we calculated how many people would be appropriate for our particular customer base. We didn't tell them. We wouldn't even tell them who we were, because they get in the mix and they can't help because they don't know anything about the business. And so when we go, the first thing we did was to calculate the actual cost per spot for the number of our target market people who are hopefully going to hear it. And then what happens is that you take a $30 spot and you find out that if somebody only has half of those people, that's a $60 spot for the client or for you. You do the same thing across all 8, and you find that some of them, you're getting a $38 spot, and some of them you're getting a $60 spot, and some of you are getting a $150 spot. Well, now that helps you understand where you ought to spend your money, because your money is limited, but the number of radio stations seems to be unlimited. There seem to be more radio stations out there. So it's the same thing for newspapers. It's the same thing. It's the same thing for all traditional media. And you have to calculate what the real value of each one of these media is. So, of course, you've probably seen something like this. Did you see a cocktail napkin with our entire marketing campaign on it? Well, that's kind of the way a lot of these campaigns go. It's like, gee, we could do our campaign. We did it over lunch. We talked about it. We should do this. We should do that. And here's what we'll do. Okay, so at least you did a little bit of planning, but that's about how absurd some of these plans get. Okay, a structured campaign works best. And this is what I've discovered over 30 years of doing it. Well, I used to do all the wrong things for my company. So I've been messing with this for 45 years, 50 years. First, in your campaign, you're going to have activities. You have to have a message. You have to select the media, and you have a calendar. The activities are direct marketing, mail, and advertising, events, PR, and of course online. The message, we've talked about how you're going to build that message and what it should be, targeting based on your current customers and cloning those customers by going to the places where they are, or you're going to expand your market into a little bit different area and you're going to determine where they are. And there are lots of ways to find out where those people are. Then you need to determine how long you're going to do it, what the sequence of it is, and then you need a production to build a production. Now, keep in mind here, this is unlike lots of parts of businesses. These are typically done as projects. So you've gone through the process. You've built a campaign to a project to build your marketing plan. Well, then you've also got you've got your campaign plan, and you got that finished. But when you actually start doing all the design work and all the copywriting, and then you select the media, you need a project plan for that too. This is project planning. Marketing people are not good project. Just don't do that well. And so it is a hard job for most people in marketing to do this, and that's why it's not done. And so the problem is that you've got creative people or writers, most of them who are doing these things, but they're not the kind of people that are necessarily, good at project management. Now we did a kind of a short little thing, 6 or 8 weeks ago, that was really a time and activity thing. So if you need to kind of learn a little bit about that. But the truth of the matter is if you have a big campaign, you have to really manage time, people, contractors, and the sequence, because if you don't get them in the right spot, you're going to screw up. It is so easy to get somebody out of sequence, and now you've got the writers waiting on the design, or the designers waiting on the writers. And in order to pull this project together, it takes more time and effort and management skill than the typical marketing person expects. This is why these things don't happen. Finally, you have to have a budget. Why do you have a budget? Well, for the same reason that you have to budget everything else. You have to plan, well, how much, should we spend? And you know what? It's never enough. So if you know how much you can spend, and there are a couple of ways of doing a budget, but if you know how much you're going to spend, then you can begin to go through and properly select the media, how much production cost you're going to have, etc. But it's always important to come up with the budget. Now, you're also going to just talk about this a second. We will have more on this later, but in another session. When we get past this content and communicate, the execution phase, we have an analyze, which includes a feedback system and analysis. And then you can make changes to your plan. And then you're finally ready to go all the way around this thing again. So you have to say, well, what are we going to achieve? How many people will we expect? How many phone calls will we expect? And you have to figure out how to track what ad they're responding to. That's why you see these little codes that people say will get you 10% off, give us this code. That's so that they can measure that particular media effectiveness. So you have to do that in order to, and you have to plan that feedback mechanism into your campaign plan. Because if you don't, you'll find that you forgot something. Like you did an ad and you sent it out and they had to have it by Friday, but you forgot to put a URL on your website. And plus, you didn't coordinate the landing page of your website with the ad. You just did something generic. But what you want to do is you want to do something specific. Your call to action needs to be very, very specific, so that if they were to go through the trouble to actually look something up based on a URL, you'd be able to tell they came exactly from that ad. That's the kind of thing that must happen. It's not easy to do, and therefore it has to be planned ahead of time. So budgeting, there are two basic types of budgeting. We won't spend a lot of time today on this, but it's a big deal. There's top-down budgeting and bottom-up budgeting. So here's the guy that says, time again for the forecast from our worst nightmares progress report. That's kind of the way some of these things are. It's like you go in and you take a look at your budget and it's like the worst nightmare. Top down is where you pick a number and you say, well, okay, our business is $1 million and we should have an advertising budget of 5%. And so our budget's $50,000. There you go. That's one way to do it. But if you do it from the bottom up, which is a lot harder to do, what you do is you look at the market, you look at the penetration possibilities, you look at your media, and you try and calculate how much money it's going to cost in order to give the message to the customer X number of times. It used to be that they said, It takes 7 times to be able to get someone to even recognize or remember your ad. Now, because of all the messaging, people say that it's gone as high as 20 times. And so, you know, if you're calculating that somebody will see your ad and give you a call and make a purchase, that's folly, because they have to see it 20 times. To put one ad in to a newspaper and expect that to do something is folly, because it'd be amazing that if you got, you know, one telephone call from one ad. It's possible that you would, but you would have had to have tens of thousands of people see it, you know, for the statistics to generate a single telephone call. So those are the 2 basic ways. There's a little bit more to budgeting than that, but we'll hold that for another discussion. Now, so we've talked about some concepts on budgeting. Pricing is how do you actually price your products? I'm not talking about all of your pricing, but how do you promote that pricing, and what is your pricing to promote? If you want to get a response by giving people a coupon, by offering them a discount or something special, then the question is, well, okay, well, what's the concept behind your pricing? What would get people to move? How will they be motivated to do that? And then a contribution margin we've talked about a lot. That's key, because based on your pricing, the question is, are you making money on that or you're not making money on that? If you don't know your contribution margin, it's kind of hard to know how low you can go in order to be able to do pricing. There are lots of concepts on pricing. And one of them is to get people to buy one thing so they'll buy more. A lot of times to get people's email, they'll give you a really good deal so that they can use the email and promote other things in the future. Or they end up selling you a series of things, because what they sold you is the beginning part and you need the end part by the time you're done with whatever it is, the concept. Okay, you recall that we have a competitive landscape that looks something like this, where you've got no competition on one pole and high competition on the other pole. You have relational relations with people, or transactions, I should say, at the bottom, and you have transactional at the top, which are somebody walks in and buys some gum. You have very little relationship with the person who bought the gum. They just wanted that particular brand. They were standing there at the counter and they picked it up and they walked out. And so this is the plot of a whole bunch of different clients I've had over the years. We're not going to get into this just due to time today, so we're going to kind of just move on. But that's just a kind of a placeholder, just to remember that the plan that you devise has a lot to do with how stiff your competition is. And if you're over here on this scale, your budget can be much lower. If you're over on this scale, you need a much higher budget. So budgets can go from 0 for the guy who has the well to 60% of your revenue, sometimes even higher than 60% of revenue, because you're selling ice to an Eskimo afterwards, after all. Okay, we really haven't discussed how to do branding yet, but we've talked a lot about positioning. But in this particular one, now this was for when I was handing out a book, and if you want some of these forms, I can certainly get them to you. But this is a campaign worksheet, and that is, you're going to do a specific campaign. You might do 5 or 6 or 7 campaigns a year. You might do 1 campaign a year. There are times when you'll run larger companies will run multiple campaigns at the same time and overlap. So you've really got to coordinate this stuff very carefully. So you put in the name and the purpose of the promotional campaign, put in your goals. What do you hope the outcome is going to be so you can come back, and what are your objectives? Very, very simple. It's a good thing just to write it down, though. Then we haven't talked much about personas, but this is a newer concept, probably within the last 10 years or so. The idea is go further than target marketing. Understand who the buyer is. And so this is a way to actually force yourself to think through, okay, and you actually give this person a name that would, this hypothetical person a name that would sort of represent who it is. is you're going to have 4 or 5 different personas for each target group. So you name that, and then you go through and you take a look, and you can get much more detailed than this. And for those of you who want it, I've got much more detailed information. But you want to talk about how does it, what is the angle of the message? Now you're thinking about copy because of your positioning, but if you have a certain type of individual, that positioning sometimes needs to be tweaked for that person, for that persona. How does it convey value to that person? It's a totally different thing if you're selling to a purchasing agent than if you're selling to a consumer. People who are like CFOs are much harder to sell to than someone who might be in the marketing spot. Ed is saying, yeah, right.
Tough as nails.
Tough.
Oh.
They're really tough to sell to. So you want to find a lower manager to be your champion first. Then they'll sell it to the CFO.
Not that idea.
Yeah. And then what are the media that are consumed by each group? Well, if you're talking about a 14 to 22-year-old female, don't be buying advertising in a newspaper. That's
Nope.
But you might want to consider social media. So in other words, that's a pretty extreme example, but there are differences among even the same kinds of people. So for instance, for the dairy, when we try to sell milk to certain people, we know that in certain groups, they have the same demographic background. And that's why we use lifestyle data as well as demographic data. But if you knew what kind of magazines somebody read, you could pick an obscure magazine and you could get to them at a lower price. And there are obscure things about people. You guys might not know that I have 2 archaeology magazines delivered to my house every month. If you knew that I was interested in archaeology, you might be able to get to me in a totally different way than you expected, because that's something that I read cover to cover almost every single month. On the other hand, while I do have a couple of newspapers still delivered to my house, I tend to scan them so much that the chances that I would see it would be very, very small. So, if you're selling needlework to women, obviously you want to pick, very specific kinds of media. But more than that, you want to understand what they do. Do they like nice cars? Do they like sports? Do they attend sporting games? When the guy walks in and says, "Would you like to buy a banner to local high school?" How do you know whether or not that would work? There are and can be very effective things. I bought some digital banners a few years ago that were put out on the field where tens of thousands of people would show up on a given season, and it was really cheap. And we did get response from that. That's because it's sort of an experimental media and nobody knew what to do with it. We recognized it might work. We tested it. It worked, and we continue to do that. So you want to just, and it's a good idea to try and say, these are the 3 or 4 personas of the people who actually buy our goods. So who's your target market? You want to identify the problem that niche has, present your solution to the problem. We're getting a little bit into selling here. Present the results you have provided for others in the same market. And then sometimes a third-party referral is also good to do at the same time. You want to explain what makes you or your product different from the competitors, and then you want to restate the value of your product to the target market. So those are the things you want to fulfill and get those all in line, and you'll have better results in your content development. It needs to be kind of uniform but created for each media. In other words, you want to say kind of the same thing, but you're not going to say the same thing in a digital ad that you do for a newspaper. You want to use bullets, text, images, and spatial, and make all of those things work together. Now, make sure that you do not talk about what we do. You want to talk about what's in it for you. You might talk about why we do it once you explain what's in it for you, but that's typical for people to say, well, we're a pail manufacturer, as if that's all you need to know. Well, what kind of pail? You know, are you talking about big ones or little ones, industrial pails? Are they plastic? Are they wood? What are you talking about? So you have to go more than that. But what you really want to do is offer them a solution, and that is, this is the lightest pail, and you can carry a lot more stuff with a lot less weight, or whatever it would be in each one of those, for each one of those products. You want to be sure that you're capturing the eyes and the ears and touch, if possible, of your target market. And there were those who, and by nose, I mean, yes, smell does have something to do with it. That is why certain fashion magazines put smell cards inside the magazine. I don't know how many of you have run into those lately. They're still out there. Magazine business is not very good. It's expensive to do that. But what happens there is that people recall vividly a smell that they thought was either terrible or was good, and that presents a certain positioning to them, whether you like it or not. And I'm not saying get crazy on smell or anything like that, but you wouldn't want to forget about a marketing a Mexican restaurant potentially. And you have to make sure that if you're selling Mexican food, that when you look at it, it doesn't look like a French restaurant. I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? But you know, people do things that are stupid all of the time, and they don't mean to do it, but they haven't thought it through. And you have to recognize that each one of these elements is important to actually communicating. Let's see, cost effectiveness, etc. Is it going to be ongoing one time, or are you going to have residual value from doing it once? Or you may do an ad that goes for 7 or 8 weeks or 10 weeks. And then the question is, well, does that have any residual value? A lot of times when I used to do newspaper advertising, we would do a series of ads that would become less and less frequent over time, because the imagery was embedded, hopefully, in the brain of the person, and they're going to stop looking at it. Yet if it's something that happens to be something you need, like pest control or plumbing, they may actually go back to the newspaper and look for that over a period of time because they remembered it. And so you don't want to stop advertising entirely. So in order to get all of this stuff done, you have to turn on your process-oriented brain. You have to keep the technical side very open, and you have to be skill and experience driven in order to be able to piece all these things together. And you can see that there are a lot of people who are not really qualified to do this, which is why the advertising salesman ends up doing it. And all of this is management. So one of the things that people hardly ever talk about in marketing is that there's management. It's like, well, you have management, you have marketing. No, you have to manage marketing. And so that's a really key piece to getting this thing done effectively. So what I thought I would do here is kind of run through so you could see what this is like. It's not as easy as a lot of people would expect, but I thought I'd put this together so you can get a sense of the pieces. You do your planning, you get your client profile completed, you make sure you know the size industry, sub-industries, and all of that stuff that we did in the competitive one. You've got your customer analysis profile, and you take a look at your competitors in order to determine how you're going to differentiate yourself. You go through a market study, you do your online analysis, and now you're ready to actually get started. You do your positioning and placement, your customer profile analysis dictates what your content is going to be and how you're going to build your content. Then you've got a strategic marketing plan. You do the campaign development, and you're finally at execution. And then the analyticals go all the way back to the front, to the top. An individual, more of an individual campaign, you've got your plan, creative concept, you have, you do your draft, you do revisions, you do design concepts, and you do revisions. It hardly ever happens in one time. If you're going to do something that's expensive, you want to make sure that it's right. It is almost always worth the design time if you're going to, spend substantially on the media. So you've got your final copy, and so you're ready now to go over and look at the individual media. Now, notice that all of this is done before we talked about the email or the direct mail or the newsletter. This is all done ahead of time for the specific campaign. The campaign, remember, has a specific purpose. It's going to do something specifically. Now all we're doing is applying that, and there are going to be some differences, but apply it to, say, email copy. If you've got a list that you're going to use, you're going to do a layout. There are several theories to how you lay out emails and what is most effective and what is least effective. And then you're going to set it up, and of course you're going to do links. There's no reason to do email unless you link to more information so that you can get people to act. And then of course you launch it. So if you do the same thing with SEO website copy. Now a lot of people do this in a vacuum. They just build it as a website. Sure, you do have to have a website, and you're going to talk about who, what, where, when, and hopefully why. Maybe you should start with why. But your website is going to have landing pages that are going to be similar to the email copy, because remember, you're trying to get something done specific. And therefore, if you want to get something specific, if someone has an email, or they respond to, say, a ad on Facebook or whatever, you have to have a page that says the same thing. They do not want to be sent to the homepage. Why would you do that? You're trying to sell nuts and bolts, and then you send them to the homepage of a hardware store, so they have to look it up again? That's like crazy. Use the technology. Utilize the selling techniques that we know are successful. Make sure it happens all the time. It's hard enough to do. When you do it wrong, it's really hard to do. It's really hard to be successful. So you do the same thing with SEO copy, direct mail copy. It's about the same thing. Now, the way you write the email copy is different from a direct mail copy. Direct mailer tends to be a lot more copy intensive. You can have bigger arguments. Email has to be shorter because people won't give it the time. And but you've made your general statement up above, and so you're simply adapting this copy now to go on the website. So a lot of times when we write copy, we write it first to go on the website, and that's the whole story is on the page that's going to be the landing page on the website. And then we begin to pare that down and rebuild it for the email or for the advertising that's going to drive the business there, et cetera. So you do the basic same thing for newsletter copy, for social media copy, and streaming as well. And then you run it through each of the execution pieces. In a couple of cases, you've got material that has to go to a processing center because you're not going to do all this yourself. And when, in fact, you hit the launch in each one of these, it's going to go hopefully to a sales team that will respond. Now, that doesn't mean that they all respond to a sales team like a person, but it might. It might mean that they filled out a form that goes on the website and somebody responds, or it could be that they made a telephone call or an email. Sure, you'd have your salespeople pick it up and go from there. You could even have an automated email like they do in HubSpot, where somebody responds in a certain way, and therefore it will automatically kick out a response to that particular one or certain words that were in there before it gets to the sales team to respond to. You may want to do here's where you do qualification. You're really trying to get rid of the people who you don't want. You only want the people who you think are going to buy. So a simple production process really has a lot of steps, and you end up with any kind of budget at all, you need somebody to serve as the production manager in order to be able to make this thing all work. Okay, we haven't talked about events, but events were not on that, or PR. But we do have events. So this is just kind of, very brief, but an event can be an offline event can be a new product launch or a conference presentation, fundraising, etc. And online, you've got webinars and Zoom meetings and launches of software, a free trial, all kinds of other things that can be online. But an event itself has an additional element, and that is that the event planning, and we haven't talked about this, but an event planning needs to coordinate with all of the advertising. So if you're going to do a seminar, an in-person seminar, like in the olden days, you need to plan that seminar, and you need to know where it's going to be and what the time is going to be and what the costs are and who's going to do the speaking and all of that kind of stuff. And then you also have to do all of the marketing in order to drive people there. So the event is all part of the marketing toolkit. When you really have serious events like an all-day conference or bigger than that, it can be really a much different situation. It can be daunting, actually. One time I was in charge of doing all of the marketing for the largest conference in Oxford, in Cambridge that ever happened. We had 850 people for 2 solid weeks, and they were in 24 different colleges. It was kind of a big deal. So you can imagine the logistics and all of that kind of stuff was a really big deal. Well, every day was planned with what we called a run sheet. So literally every minute of every day had to be planned. And so because we wanted to interface the communications, we had to plan so-and-so is going to do the introduction, and then that person's going to come up and speak and do the plenary. And then right after that, they would have a break of some kind with something light and airy, and then the next plenary, et cetera. So it goes through this whole thing. And then every single night we produced a newsletter that was given to everybody under their doors the next morning. And so we had to have the writers writing about 6 events during the day, and they started writing at 4 o'clock, and we printed by 10 o'clock and delivered those. That's a complex event. That's a complex marketing communications issue. PR and distribution and follow-up. PR is a really effective tool that can interface, as you know, with marketing in a variety of ways. It is marketing as far as I'm concerned, but basically you can set up Google alerts that will tell you when a certain subject comes up, and then that can trigger your responses. In most cases, you try and have the press release ahead of time so that you can send it out to the press. You maintain your own press list so that when something does come up, or you have an emergency or a catastrophe even, that when that all happens, you have everything ready. This stuff should all be ready to go so that all you have to do is write the content and start sending it out. And you also post it on your website as well, or the client in this particular case. And when you have an option, you use Inland Empire US in order to be able to promote it. So the management of the process, we're just about wrapped up here, but the production management techniques, well, realistic timelines are hard to do for some people, but they have to be realistic. If you can't get the timeline right, then you're going to have everybody breaking up, or somebody at the first bumps into the next guy, and it just pushes everything out. And you end up having a real mess. And so some things are dependent on a process, and some things are not dependent on a process. So you've got both parallel lines where things are moving along at the same one, and then you've got the time when they come together and something has to be done prior to that. So that's project management for real. Specific steps through each of those processes. Understand that you have to have a duration of a step as well as the time spent on each step. How long does it take, but not how much time did you spend? But you need to know how much time if you're going to keep track of costs as well, because people can, if they're doing something incrementally, they can do one project, another project, go back to that project. Assignment of a skill to each one of those steps. In other words, you're going to give a designer design work and a writer writing work. So in summary, planning really beats the old seat of the pants. And I want to say also, it beats guerrilla marketing. Guerrilla marketing is not the hot topic as it used to be 5 or 10 years ago when the book Guerrilla Marketing was written. It used to drive me crazy because I'd have clients say, we need to do guerrilla marketing. Well, what is guerrilla marketing? It's, well, you come up with an idea and you go do it and see if it sticks. I never found that to work very well. If you, that's probably as bad as buying stocks that you don't know anything about. And so you just buy it and you see what happens and you sell at a loss most of the time. So that's what guerrilla marketing is. It doesn't make any sense to me, despite the fact that there have been some really good promotions that have been done over the years where people do a quick meetup and they have a clown who's juggling or whatever's going on as an event, and they make it really fun. But or you stand out in front of a store with a sign on, or do sort of half crazy things. Now, there's not anything wrong with doing the crazy part. It's just make sure it's part of your overall campaign plan. That's all. So I think what happens in guerrilla marketing is it's an excuse for very creative people not to have to do their jobs. That's guerrilla marketing, in my opinion. So you want to select a creative message based on targeting, the media based on the mix of personas that you've developed. You want to build campaigns that have achievable goals and a purpose. You want to manage this using process-driven approach, as we've talked about, and want to get help in anything that you have, anything that's special. So I think, yep, that is it. So we have some time, I think, for some conversation and questions, unlike most meetings. If you have any.
Good stuff, Ron. A lot of departments within the department, a lot of moving parts into creating that campaign. It's not all just, hey, let me put this on print, get my message out, and send it out to the world. There's so much interchangeable little steps involved, especially when you're putting money behind it and you got somebody, or if you're representing a client that has money behind it, you better be doing this due diligence on your campaign, your target audience, and all these steps. Otherwise, if you're going to get, oh, we tried that, it didn't work, or, we wasted a lot of money just, not really kind of like what you said, just throwing out there and sticking things to the wall. But the question is this off of a book? You mentioned, I seen book reference in there. Is this off a book? No? Here's your slides? No,
these are all mine. And this is stuff that I learned firsthand over 40 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No,
it all resonates.
That is not to say that I haven't read dozens and dozens of books on these subjects. I don't mean to say that. And so are some of these concepts somewhere else? Yeah, sure they are. It's not like it's all invented here kind of thing at all. But it is not anybody else's formula, I should say.
So it's a conglomerate of years of experience all wrapped up into.
Yeah, and what I found worked. That's what worked. I've tried to explain why. I've tried to understand why my clients have grown faster than other clients or other companies. And I think there are several reasons. One reason is that Until recently, I don't know what it is now, it's probably bad again, but it used to be that a marketing manager was only at a company or worked for a client for 22 months. Now, 22 months is not long enough to see if your campaign worked, because it takes, I mean, literally, it takes several months to go through all the process and do an adequate job. If you're going to build a new marketing plan, you have to do all of the steps. And so there's time and effort there. You have to query people and do research and figure all this stuff out. So, and then by the time you begin to do the marketing, before you get it executed, you're probably talking you're into the job 6 or 8 months already. And so you've only got a year and a half to see if it works. Well, most marketing campaigns should last from 2 months to 2 years. So by the time the whole thing is done, built, ready to go, and you figure out how much of it worked or when it did or didn't work, you already lost your job and you never knew if it worked or not.
Mm-hmm.
So what you have is you've got marketing people that never see if their ideas worked or didn't. That's my only advantage as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and I think you can definitely show from a business owner from somebody that's going to come in with that planning, and the marketing. And I'm speaking in digital marketing because I really don't have any experience as part of print or anything as far as that. I'm just talking about what I see in the digital marketing world over the few years that I've been down the rabbit hole. Is that most of them don't even go through that process. They're so quick to get a sale and get a close. I think the game for them is more so get a close, get a sale, get the money in, and then hope it works. And that's why you see when I talk to businesses, there's so much cleaning up to do, and there's so much of the you gotta sell yourself and your services and why you're the person for the job outside of others, because there's a lot of these, smooth talkers that just come in, they come for the sale and they just, like you said, throw stuff out the wall. And if it works, great. But, it's a long game, like you mentioned. And even, if you have some signs of success early on, that may not be the things change. And you might have to go back to the strategy, analyze your data, and then come back and say, hey, you know what, this didn't work, but we got enough looks here, so where we can kind of redirect our strategy. So it's ongoing, and people recycle. I've seen people recycling marketing guys like crazy, and how is that ever going to get that business anywhere if, like you said, it takes 1 to 2 years to see if things going, and they're recycling marketers trying different things. So it's it's definitely a lot to think about, and it's something to think about continuously, not just a one-time, hey, we're going to try a campaign this time and see if it works.
Yeah, you got it. It is continuous, and of course this particular cycle was set as a continual process. So once you get up, you get through the execution, you get through the measuring phase. You don't stop. You're now going back again because you now have learned more about your customers. Which ones responded to it? Which ones did not respond to it? Now you see how valuable that information is. You think you've got a great customer. You go through a whole campaign. You've maybe touched them 15 or 20 times. They haven't responded. Why? You need to know. How many of those who did respond? Why did they? There are gems in there that if you figure them out, you can exponentially explode your business because you've figured out what it is that really resonates with customers. Mm-hmm. Think that on your own in a guerrilla fashion, or just going, well, our customers are this and that, and they buy because they perceive that our value is better. I don't know. I'm not sure that's, you're going to spend $100,000 on that campaign. Well, people do all the time. They say, well, here's where our customer, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to sell it. Well, if you found out that if you just added it a little differently, or you offered them something different and you got a 30 or 40% jump in closes, wouldn't that mean something really serious? I mean, those are incredible moments when you figure those things out. And you can't do that through planning. You can only do that through feedback. Yeah. Mm-hmm. really know your customers and really understand why are they motivated to buy this stuff. It's hard to do. It's hard. Yet the rewards can be amazing. You can, because you can really, you really can put a company on a different trajectory once you understand what those motivations are really like. Now, not every company has, these down deep, tricky motivations to figure out. If you're selling gum, as I mentioned before, it's like, well, they're standing there, they're going to pick it. The branding is a big deal because they recognize spearmint or juicy fruity or whatever, and they may go 2 or 3 brands. Can you imagine how difficult it is to get somebody to try a different brand of gum? I mean, that's a big deal, and because it's a residual sale for year after, I mean, it's a whole lifetime. Somebody buys the same gum. So you better get it right when the kid is, say, 14, 15, 16 years old. They better have tasted your gum in order to determine if they like it. Because chances are, by the time they're 22, they will never make their decision to try something new again. So those are the little things that come up, and then of course when you're in industrial sales, they're a lot more pragmatic. People will say, "Gee, I sent the purchase order over to your competitor. I had you do the estimate, but you missed my delivery by 5 days." And you go, "What? Why didn't you call me?" It's like, "Hey, I've got too much stuff to do. I don't have time to call you and say you missed it by 5 days." And so I just sent it to the guy who was going to give it to me 3 days early. They're the ones who deserve the business. And by the way, stop calling me and asking me these questions. I've got too much to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know what I've come to realize in my own business and experience with taking on clients as marketing clients is that the sales team. I mean, you can do all of this work, but if the sales team isn't there to actually handle and the customer service and to close the business that comes in from it, then that could be a fallout from the campaign. Yeah. So
there's a lot of in the sales team today as well, and the interface with digital technology. HubSpot's numbers indicate that 85% of the people who make a telephone call have already made the decision to buy. And so the salesperson thinks that it's their job to explain the company and explain the product and go through the whole thing again. But in the customer's mind, all he has to know is, give me the price and the delivery, reassure me on this one question I have, and I'll give you the order. So why does a salesperson go through this whole mess? It's because that's the way they were trained in the old world, back in the olden days, before, when the person who was calling was only 20 or 30% convinced that they would buy, and they needed to be sold. Today, we do much less selling and more closing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
People have to be retrained in order to be able to deal with this new type of consumer behavior.
Yeah, and a big part of that, especially with the digital, speaking again, is follow-up. Is the follow-up sequence on that. I've burned through a lot of money, underestimated the sales cycle in the real estate world, thinking that people were going to just come in and sign an application and give me your social security for a credit card. Well, I learned thousands of dollars later that all of this planning was done, but the follow-up process and the second step was just non-existent. So all that data was there, but we didn't have anything to follow up with and actually close them. So it was
right
lesson that we learned.
And that's a hard lesson, because just that first call is expensive, and continual communication is much less time consuming, much more rewarding, and much less expensive. And so you go through all of that, you get the lead, and then you don't have what it takes to get them through the process. And I've got an interesting example. I went out to Sedona a few weeks ago, and I just fell in love with the place. And And so I ended up contacting a real estate person, and we had a nice conversation. It was really helpful, answered all my questions. Found out it was a little too expensive for the most part for what I was thinking about. But she said, you know, I have listings, can I go ahead and send them to you? And I said, sure, I would like to keep track of it. I want to watch the market and understand what's going on over there. So she sends me something, 2 or 3 times a week. And you click on it and it takes you to a website that looks like some industrial machine parts form. It's got one picture and it's got a bunch of data in there, and it doesn't have views. And it's kind of like, you can't look at Zoom and learn that you cannot treat people this way. But no, she's sending this really stupid listing out of some straight listing service that she has, some multi-listing. And it's like, that's not helpful. You're not really selling me. Number one, I don't want to buy. Number two, I don't want to buy property, and I don't need to look at $2 million houses. Send me what's relevant to me, and you'll find that when I pick up the phone to call, you'll be the one who's going to get called. So here, she's invested an hour on the phone, and she's investing time to be able to do send this out to her email list. But she hasn't thought through, even though she's had personal conversations. She knows my age. She knows my ability to buy. I mean, she asks all the qualifying questions. She knows a lot more about me than the average person does, and as to whether or not I would be somebody that could be a customer. And yet she doesn't customize it for me in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
So she's doing the same thing.
Yeah, well, real estate agents and loan officers aren't really the brightest when it comes to this, especially those that jump in when the market's hot. So it's really a tap dance when you're talking to these people, and you can catch it right away who's in it for the long haul and their customer, rather than the people that are just looking for a check.
Well, and you can see how a company like Zillow, and there are others, as you well know, but you can see how what they've done is they built a consumer interface that people are comfortable with, and they've set a new standard. It's like they're the new Disney in real estate, not commercial, but in residential real estate. They're the new Disney. They've got the excitement, they've got the fun, and what's happened is, and I don't know this, but I'm suspecting most realtors said, oh yeah, well that's not, yeah, it's nice, but that's not really needing so much more for the customer, and if somebody needs to do the close and all of the rest. Well, now look, they're actually moving into the real estate business. They weren't there to do a free listing service and do advertising. That's never what they planned on doing. They were planning on adding all these auxiliary real estate services to their interface, and they are positioned in the next, 10 years to really take a substantial amount of the residential real estate business away from the traditional realtor. It's because the traditional realtor has no idea about what digital is doing to the customer. Now, they can see it, but they don't want to acknowledge that it's actually going to be an effect to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a big saying along with in the real estate world from I hear a lot of people is that they all claim to be, it's still a people type local market people, people to people type of that transaction that isn't going to go away. But look at what's happening, and yeah, it's happening pretty fast with what happened with COVID now. Yep. So it's the backbone of what realtors have right now is that MLS and the data, but it's free to everybody now. Oh, and you can't hold that as a leverage or position of power to a customer thinking that they have to go to you to get properties. They're finding their own properties on their own, and there's technology companies that are out there that are willing to forego that commission structure because they're quarterbacking it from their marketer and their computer. They don't have to be physically present, and they're willing to take that hit on the commission. And look at all of these companies that are happening right now.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And so, I mean, there's a case where the what looks to be a somewhat harmless kind of digital thing is, you know, sneaking up on a whole industry, and that's going to continually happen in most industries across, just across the whole country. Is that, particularly those that are consumer driven, is that there are folks that have some big ideas, and as you well know, there's a lot of money to be invested in ideas that are going to capture new markets and provide new services. That's where the entrepreneurship's going.
Exactly. Good stuff.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. So, well, I think that's it for today. My voice is just about ready to give out, and so we will be in touch with you guys in a couple of weeks.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Ron, for everything. Even though I didn't spoke much today, this was very powerful, and I think I've just been trying to observe most of the stuff that just happened in front of my eyes today to figure out a way how to implement it in my own.
Sure.
Yeah, we got our homework to do as far. I want to actually run through some of these questions in the data just to make sure that as Edgar and I are contemplating our own marketing plan for not only for us, but it looks like the clients that we're serving are asking for this type of help as well too. So so running through these questions and this data and the prerequisite to any campaign is something that Edgar and I will go through, and
Well, and of course, there's a whole lot of automation that can happen in this process. That I've always thought that sooner or later these things will be more available digitally, and so maybe we should build a digital platform to do it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Actually, kind of what we've been talking about, some sort of self-automated system that just runs itself.
Yeah.
As long as the campaign makes sense, that might not be a bad idea.
But it doesn't go without all of this data beforehand.
Yeah.
I mean, all of this data has to be done, and then
there are ways to automate some of that. Not that they're small issues and just needs programming, but there are ways to get that data and bring it in and look at industries and so forth. But particularly where you're looking at a specific industry, it's easy to plug that data in so it's available for everybody.
yeah.
That's why a narrow business makes so much sense. You can actually do that, say, just for one business, one industry. Yeah. So we should talk about it. We should.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have more to talk about when we're right in the middle of this, so we're hoping to get a campaign out pretty soon here, so we can start to at least test the water, test